What makes a good story? I know everyone will have a different kind of favourite story. I know I love a good epic fantasy adventure. Maybe you love romance, a tale that sweeps you off your feet and reminds you of when you were 16 and your heart fluttered when he looked at you. Maybe you relax by watching those slice of life stories that follow the hero just tackling moving into a new neighbourhood, the familiar strangeness of it all. Action movies that sprint past at a breakneck pace. Breakups that linger on your soul until all the tears have flown out. But I think that all of these stories have a few things in common. I promise I'm going somewhere with this, and I'd like you to come along with me to talk about what makes a good story. First and foremost, for any good story, it must be understandable. This is kind of tragic. There are a million stories that we'll never get to experience because of a language barrier, whether that's foreign or just unfamiliar. Using large and unfamiliar words doesn't work. Sometimes even familiar words in unfamiliar ways is a problem. I learned that last time I hosted this whip, that shibboleth is not a word everyone is familiar with, but that's fine. Not everyone needs that word. Just like I didn't consciously know the word pedagogy before diving into school infrastructure. But for a story to grab you, you need to be warmed up with that vocabulary. Of course, that isn't to say don't use terminology where it's needed, but there's a time and a place. You can't just dive into Morgoth choosing to rise up against the Iluvatar and the works of the Maiar, but maybe start by introducing it through a familiar topic, or immediately explaining in terms that your audience will understand. The Iluvatar is like God, the Maiar are basically angels, and Morgoth is the equivalent of the devil. We also need to make sure we stay on topic. While a tangent can be amusing, you can't veer too far off course without turning back and reminding people of where we were. From the start of your story to the end, there should be clear through lines that your audience can follow. This led to that informed this, which of course informed this other part, and that's how we arrived where we arrived. In the same way you might prepare a report for a client or plan out your novel, there shouldn't be any surprises or twists that you couldn't see coming if you've laid that foundation. When Sam and Frodo leave the Shire, there's no confusion about what's happening. They have a simple goal, made with simple words, not a simple task. And when they present the ring to the Council of Elrond and Frodo declares that he shall be the ring bearer, how could it be anyone else? At the end of the story, the culmination of their journey to Mount Doom, no one should be surprised how that's gone down. When you're reporting on your focus groups, you give context for where they're starting, how the topic will impact them, and they will respond accordingly, if not appropriately. People have a vested interest in their home and any potential infrastructure that might be constructed there. If you ask them about the construction impacts and their recommendations for how things should be prepared around them, it should be no surprise that they care about the greenery and noise impacts. If the story's told well, if you can explain the past, you can understand the path that led us to this point and beyond. On that note, all good stories are relatable. Maybe you haven't had to carry a ring through a war-torn world, or you've been fortunate enough to not live near an active building site, so those don't immediately jump out at you. But we have struggled to keep on top of things that are asked of us. That's human. All good stories are presented through a lens that the listener can relate to. You find an emotion, and that becomes the anchor for each step on the way. Thankfully, this is half covered in our work as consultants. We have a predefined audience that we can mold our story towards, our clients, and we have the first-hand experience the leads of our stories need, the stakeholders. You can use that real lived experience to grab hold and make the story about people, not the lofty concepts or vague designs that won't grab people. However, we do still need to present the story in a way people want it delivered. Every good fantasy novel has a map of the world. It reminds people of the tone, it's part of the meme that forms a fantasy novel. There are expectations on the kinds of worlds and the setting that comes with it being a fantasy, so you assume that people in this story don't have the internet or an Uber to take them to places they want to go. Your story needs to meet the audience's expectations. We can't, as much as we'd like, deliver an audio recording of our story alone. We have to follow the expected formatting with our executive summary, background info, project events. This lets us present that coherent, relatable story while also making sure it meets expectations. No one wants a story where you see the heroes win at the start and then spend the rest of the time patting themselves on the back. Which brings us to a satisfying conclusion. Not just yet for this video, but in our story. That conclusion should be the resolution of a promise you make at the start. Like starting a long hike, starting at the lowest point, you promise views at the top, you promise the climb will be hard, but worth it. You tell them that every recommendation here is based on feedback and evidence, and we'll show you how we work that out along the way. All of these elements that you've sewn in together let you bring your audience along. And then you start climbing, slowly at first, introducing terms, planting seeds in their mind of where this story will take them, describing in just the right amount of detail the trees, or the rocky crags, or the survey outcomes, and when you reach the top, understanding of the journey so far, and of the return trip back down the mountain. Because everything makes sense now, the story makes sense, and the way forward is clear. Satisfaction. As humans, it's easy to forget that the people you're communicating with aren't as wrapped up in your own story as you are. They don't have all the details, and without them, they won't be able to follow the story you set out to tell. I know I find difficulty with that. But I find that focusing on the journey, not the destination, when you remember to keep it understandable, when you force yourself to stay on topic, when you make an effort to ensure it's relatable, all the pieces fit. And the story makes perfect sense.